Hi, this is Paul, and this is Rough Draft for Sunday, where I run through the current draft of my Sunday sermon. Now, as I mentioned last week, sermons can change quite a bit between Friday and Sunday. Usually thoughts over the weekend. I usually not really redo, but sort of spruce up the sermon, or sometimes it becomes a redo on Sunday morning. But that's, if you want to check out how the sermon finally goes, sometimes for better, sometimes for worse, you can find that on the church channel. The link to the church channel is below, or www.livingstonecrc.com. And we stream on Sunday morning. John Steingard used to play in a Christian rock band, and on Instagram in May 2020, he, as is called today, deconstructed or deconverted, changed his mind about believing in God. The YouTube algorithm serves up videos that it thinks I might be interested in, and it was serving up this title, which kept catching my eye. The YouTube algorithm isn't terribly dumb. The problem of the hiddenness with God. And so I watched some of that video, and he speaks with another YouTuber who no longer believes in God, and they sort of compare notes. And they raise a question which many people raise. Why isn't God more obvious? Why isn't it just that, well, there's God, we see him, we can touch him, we know he's there, we can have a personal relationship with him, we can ask him to do things for us, yes or no, he can show himself to people, because if God sort of wants everybody to be in his fan club, why doesn't it make it more easy or more obvious? And then all kinds of other questions flow in. Well, why would God allow so much suffering and so much evil? And if God is all powerful and all good, this doesn't make any sense. And so then people deconstruct or deconvert, and they say things, well, I don't believe there is a God, and I think everything is just up for chance. And, oh, okay, I'm not sure that's an improvement, but we'll talk about that. Now, over the last few weeks, we've been reading quite consistently Psalm 19. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal knowledge. They have no speech. They use no words. No sound is heard from them. Yet the voice goes out into all the earth, their words to the ends of the world. And it seems like John Steingard and his friend can't see it, can't hear it, don't want to. What's going on with that? Why can't we see God? Now, every week on my YouTube channel, I do a question and answer session with whoever has questions and wants to sit for the answers. It usually takes a couple of hours. And they're posted on YouTube, so you can go back questions and answers. And these kinds of things come up semi-regularly. When I was a kid, I would think about this idea, because the Bible says, well, you can't see God and live. And I would think, well, what does that mean? Is it sort of a tyrannical thing? Is God secret so that he stays hidden? And if anybody sort of peeks behind the curtain, like in The Wizard of Oz, some angel comes down with a big sword and chops your head off? I mean, what's with that rule? What do you mean I can't see God? Psalm 19 says the heavens declare his glory. Well, why couldn't I see God? Well, over the last 3 years, I've been involved in a great deal of philosophical wonderings and conversations, and learning about cognitive science and historically what we mean by this term God. And the more actually this thing makes sense, it's not so much that there's an angel coming down to chop my head off if I look behind the curtain of The Wizard of Oz, but who God is and what God is and how I see and what I am. Well, I don't really have much doubt about the biblical saying that you can't see God and live. Now, this week, actually in the Discord server, someone asked a really excellent question. It was building off the previous week, which was on January 8th, building off the previous question and answer. Is it because we see the world through projections, that we see the Father through his image, and would be annihilated if we were to see him without the mediation of his image? Now, when he says image with a capital I, he's certainly referring to Colossians 1:15, where Jesus is the icon or the image of the invisible God. And of course, that's where we're going to go, because we've been talking about Psalm 19 and then John 1. But the world is too big and we are too small. And, well, why can't God just tell us or show us? And when I was looking around for pictures a couple of weeks ago and trying to wrestle with this question of what's up with us, I found, I don't even remember what I was searching for, but it was one of these websites with stock photos that I can use royalty free. And here's this scene of a man and a woman. Actually, I think I was looking for pictures of conflict within couples, and they're back to back, their faces in their hands, their eyes are covering up, they're surrounded by the sea. And I just got a sense of, well, this is sort of how we are sometimes in the midst of God's glory, sometimes in the midst of our pain. You can tell an alcoholic, you're an alcoholic, but it doesn't do any good. Why doesn't it work? What are we trying to do? We don't work that directly. There are deep truths about ourselves we lie to ourselves to shelter ourselves from. You see this in victims of abuse. You see, we are small and God is infinite, and there is a real sense in which we are basically, we have to cut down the view of the world. And our minds are too small to comprehend the infinite. And so, well, he gives us little glimpses of himself. And even to those glimpses, we're reactive because we might not like what we see. Now, there's, of course, a story with Moses, and Moses, as the book of Deuteronomy says, was the most humble man that ever lived, and he certainly had the favor of God. And sometimes in the book of Exodus and Numbers, God and Moses sort of fight like a married couple over Israel, the third party, and it gets to a climax in Exodus 33, and the Lord said to Moses, I will do the very thing you have asked, which saying, my presence will go with you, because I am pleased with you, and I know you by name. And right away we see this intimacy between God and Moses, that, of course, God knows everything, and so he knows everyone, but the point here is that Moses is in some way special. Then Moses said, now show me your glory. And the Lord said, I will cause all my goodness to pass in front of you, and I will proclaim my name, the Lord, in your presence. For I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion. But, he said, you cannot see my face. And now you might remember that at the close of almost every service, I use the Mosaic blessing, and may his face shine upon you. And you can already begin to see how these things are connecting. But you can't see my face. Well, why not the face? Because, well, at least from human beings, especially now with masks over our faces, we have a sense that the face reveals part of us like no other part of us can. And there's a sense in which the face is the fullness of God in some way, and it would be too much for us. We would well, read the book of Revelation when the Lamb and the one on the throne come down, and the people of the earth, great and small, cry out to the mountains to fall on them, to keep me from their faces. You cannot see my face, for no one can see me and live. Then the Lord said, there's a place near here where you may stand on a rock. When my glory passes by, I will put you in the cleft of the rock and cover you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I will remove my hand, and you will see my back, but my face must not be seen. Of course, C.S. Lewis riffed on this idea quite a bit in what was likely his best piece of fiction, Till We Have Faces. And Lewis sort of argued through a Greek myth, it's not so much that God doesn't have a face that we can see. It's that we don't have faces to see. I know that sounds cryptic and strange, but you'd have to read Lewis's book. Now the Word becomes flesh and made its dwelling among us. It tented amongst us. It tabernacled amongst us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. Now, you would imagine that if the Creator God comes to earth, no one can do better than the maker of the world at just about anything? If you're the Son of God and the Daniel 7 Son of Man, surely when you talk, everyone will understand you perfectly. Everyone will fall in love with you. Everyone will fall in line with your commandments. The earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of God as the waters cover the sea. All injustice will go away, all suffering will cease, and everyone will hear you and obey. Now, part of us thinks that. But then when we keep thinking about that, we begin to say, well, wait a minute. Wouldn't something be lost? Wouldn't some of our humanity pass away at such power? Wouldn't we in some way be destroyed if God would do such a thing? Now, in Luke 4, after the temptations, Jesus returns to Galilee in the power of the Spirit, and news about him spread through the whole countryside. He was teaching in their synagogues, and everyone praised him. And it seems, well, this seems to be exactly what you said. Isn't that what we imagine? Jesus would walk around and everyone would say, oh, Jesus, what a wonderful man. What a wonderful guy. Everything he does is good. Everything he says is true. We will listen and obey. We will go and hear everything he says, and we will completely submit ourselves to him. Right? So he went up to Nazareth, where he had been brought up. And on the Sabbath day he went into the synagogue, as was his custom, and he stood up to read. And the scrolls of the prophet Isaiah was handed to him. Unrolling it, he found a place where it was written, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners, and recovery of sight to the blind, and to set the oppressed free, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Well, can't think of a better sermon for the hometown boy made good, to come to Nazareth, and it would be sort of a coronation, perhaps. But now, what's in your mind's eye? Then he rolls up the scroll and gave it back to the attendant and sat down. And the eyes of everyone in the synagogue were fastened on him. And he began by saying to them, "Today this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." Is it really? Aren't the Romans still here? Isn't my grandma still sick? Don't my cousins still live in poverty? But what do you mean fulfillment? And what does this have to do with you? And now Luke and the stories compress a lot, and so everyone was pleased with him. So we assume by this point, even though it's not been in Luke, that Jesus has already been going about doing miracles in other places like Capernaum. That's implicit in what will come pretty soon. Well, what is in their mind's eye about what fulfillment of this prophecy means? And what is in our minds about what this would mean if Jesus would come to our church or come to our city council or stand upon a podium of the President of the United States and declare himself to be no less than God or God's prophet or God's fulfillment or some great thing that we can somehow fit into our mind? What would it take to achieve such a thing? Would Jesus do this all by himself, sort of like a superhero racing around? Would he have supernatural powers to go into Herod's place and blow down all the soldiers and remove the soldiers and have every father do what's right by his wife and his children, and every mother do what's right by their children, and every business partner do what's right by their business partners and by their customers, and heal every illness and go around the world and set everything right? Is that what Jesus is saying? Now, if you look at the list, you can see that things start getting complicated in terms of application. Good news to the poor. All right, we say, well, that sounds good, but what does that mean about the rich? Well, I'm not rich. Well, chances are if you have a smartphone or a computer or a smart TV and you're watching this, and if you live in North America, and if you live in California, and if you live in Sacramento, your house is, well into six figures. just by virtue of it being in California and on the scale of the world, yeah, you're pretty much up there. And freedom for the prisoner. Well, which prisoners is he going to set free? And maybe some of the prisoners are there held unjustly, but certainly not all of them. Do we want all the prisoners let out into the street? Well, we'll sight for the blind. Well, that sounds good, but are you just going to keep to the blind people, or are you going to, how about the people with cancer and heart disease and COVID and all those other nasty diseases? What about them? And set the oppressed free. Well, are you oppressor or oppressed? Well, maybe by virtue of your sex or the color of your skin or your socioeconomic group or the history of your people, you consider yourself oppressed, but has not some aspect of your identity also been oppressor? And so when he's evening the scale with everything on this list, does this necessarily mean good things for you? And the year of the Lord's favor, well, that's the year of Jubilee, and debts are canceled, and property goes back to its inheritance owner. And, well, what if you've done well the last few years and you've gobbled up farms of others? Now you got to give it back. You paid full price. Right away you can see that, well, I'm not sure that this is good news. And you say, well, the context. This is all set in a historical tradition of Israel so that the terms are contextualized for the audience. Okay. Isaiah 61 talks about the restoration of Israel after the Babylonian destruction and captivity. Well, yeah, that was sort of fulfilled. And well, what about the rest of the world? Is this messianic ethno-nationalism? We can already begin to see that this is getting really complex very quickly. Okay, well, maybe it's good for them. Maybe it's good for them. And the hometown boy makes good. But what about the rest of the world? All spoke well of him and were amazed at the gracious words that came from his lips. Isn't this Joseph's son? They said. But very quickly, it starts to go bad. Jesus said to them, and Jesus seems to be in the middle of it going bad. Jesus said to them, surely you will quote this proverb to me, physician, heal yourself. And well, what does he mean by that? Well, what we'll see here is that there's two aphorisms and two prophetic examples. This aphorism is often interpreted as something like, well, it's time for you to do with your family what you've done for strangers. Because if anybody's going to partake in your good fortune, it should be us first, because we're your family and we're closest to you. We're your hometown. You're our homie. This, if anybody benefits from you, Jesus, it had better be us. And even this saying itself, physicians, especially in the ancient world, would do things that are painful, and people wondered about the efficacy. Is it safe and effective? And of course, often in the ancient world, it wasn't. So it's like, well. And you see this with even doctors today. If I go to a doctor, I want to go to a doctor who's the picture of health, who doesn't smoke and eats right and doesn't have any extra weight and his blood pressure is under control. And I don't want to go to the fat smoking doctor because, what does he know about health? He's a mess, or she's a mess. And so they're looking at Jesus and maybe thinking, shouldn't you look like Apollo? Well, what do you mean Apollo? Well, that Greek god that looks like a god, that acts like a god. Shouldn't Jesus be acting more like a prophet and more like a Messiah and will be first in line? Now, this exact same assumption will happen to the mother of James and John. But have my sons at your right and left hand. It's absolutely natural to think about. But, well, if we don't like the sight of God, it seems we didn't much like the sight of the Son of God either. And you will tell me, do here in your own hometown what we have heard you do in Capernaum. Why did you start the miracles there? Why don't you give us the goose that lays golden eggs? And why don't you make us rich? And why don't you make us the center of your new revolution so that when it all comes down, the center of the world will be in Nazareth? not Jerusalem, and certainly not Rome or Caesarea or Alexandria or any of those other places named after pagan emperors. But Jesus is not done. Truly, I tell you, he continued, no prophet is accepted in his hometown. I assure you that there are many widows in Israel in Elijah's time, when the sky was shut for 3.5 years, and there was severe famine throughout the land. Yet Elijah was not seen to any of them, but to a widow in Zarephath in the region of Sidon. Why should this foreigner get the blessings of God when his own chosen people are in need? Well, when you say it that way, and we know the way this Jesus story goes, and were there not many in Israel with leprosy in the time of Elisha the prophet? Yet not one of them was cleansed, only Naaman the Assyrian that had a Jewish slave girl, the Syrian that had that Jewish slave girl by raiding Israel, the Syrian who and then when he tried to pay it, his money was rejected, and Gehazi got the leprosy, and Jesus just points out in the scriptures that, hey, wait a minute, this doesn't work anything like you think it should work. Well, how should it work? Well, Jesus was born here. Jesus is one of us. Jesus will rise. Our enemies will be put down. We'll be at the top of the heap. We'll get wealthy. We'll get powerful. Everyone will serve us, and that's the way the world works. And yes, it is the way the world works, but this is the Son of Man and Son of God. And how does the world work then with him? Where is he going? All the people in the synagogue were furious when they heard this. They got up, drove him out of the town, took him to the brow of a hill on which the town was built in order to throw him off the cliff. Hometown makes good, hometown makes him dead. That's what they're trying to do. And if you're paying attention to the Bible, this is the recapitulation of the Garden of Eden. Jesus is holding out on us. We're supposed to be first in line at the divinity trough. Jesus is contemptuous towards us. Jesus owes us. We raised him. We put in the effort. Come on, Jesus. A little bit trickle down into our trough, please. It's the garden recapitulated. The serpent whispers to the man and the woman, he's holding out on you. He doesn't want to share all that knowledge of good and evil power with you. Well, once they got the knowledge of good and evil, it didn't go so well. So what do we want? I love the scene in Talladega Nights where I love, I pray to the little baby Jesus, dear 8-pound, 6-ounce newborn baby Jesus, don't even know a word yet, just a little infant, so cuddly, but still so omnipotent. God is going to be snowflakes and rainbows and unicorns and fairies. You think that spiky horn on the unicorn's head is for, turning pages in love stories? Do we really want to see God? Do we really want to be seen by him? So what do we want? And I've spoken about this before. The Good Place was a fun show about, what about the afterlife? What does that mean? And if you get all the way to the end of the show, the 4th season's now on Netflix, so spoiler alert, they don't have it figured out. The best they can think of is annihilation. But if I'm the judge of the earth, yeah, and we all look at you and say, I don't want you to be the judge of the earth. Here in the United States, we believe in limited power. We don't want a king because we don't trust a king. What does the rest of the world want? I don't know. It's what I want. And so here we are, and division scales, and we see it in our streets. Our focus is on a dividing line within one nation, but if we would include all the other nations or all the little dividing lines within the big dividing line and the other continents and the other religions, well, what do we mean? Where are we? Can there be peace? What they really understand is maybe more National Guard troops to to keep order. I think about the Marvel Cinematic Universe and Thanos, which is pretty close to death in Greek, and he snaps his fingers and eliminates half of living things in all the universe. I think, oh, that'd be horrible. Well, death, the real one, eliminates all living things. It just takes a little bit more time. Is this the peace we're looking for? Half the nation, the other half you don't agree with. Wish they would all just go away at the snap of a finger. All the people in the synagogue were furious when they heard this. They got up and drove him out of town and took him to the brow of a hill on which the town was built in order to throw him off the cliff. But he walked right through the crowd and went on his way. I guess there's not going to be cake and ham buns. Well, ham buns. What am I saying? That's Dutch Calvinist after church food. That won't be synagogue after church food. We would wait. He would wait for the proper stage, which will be Jerusalem, the city of the great king. He would walk then not away from danger, but into danger. He would be delivered into the hands of Gentiles so that the rest of the world could get in on the act too, and he would be killed. Silencing him was the only agreement they could find within their vehement disagreement in their culture war. How obvious do we want God to be, really? Are we ready for that? Are we ready for the day of the Lord? Because when the day of the Lord comes, it's the great and terrible day of the Lord, and it's the assassination of Egyptian babies, and it's armies, and it's burning, and it's catastrophe, and it's the destruction of governments, and it's apocalypse, and it's revelation. And those are all the terms that fall on the man of sorrows as he's hanging on a cross. Is this what we want to face? Or do we want someone to face it for us? We should seek his face. We should want to see him, but we should not be naive. We should not be infants. Moses wanted to see him, and God appreciated the desire and moved towards him. We should seek the face of the Son of Man, of his own Son. We should embody his life. We are his body. We are his witnesses. We do so imperfectly, sometimes tragically so, but he is not without a witness. And the message that he gave, good news to the poor, freedom for the prisoner, sight for the blind, set the oppressed free, the year of the Lord's favor. The mission remains. It may be cruciform sometimes. It may be symbolic other times. It will remain until the day of its final fulfillment, and that day will come, and we will see him. Will we cry on the mountains to fall on us, or we welcome him because we love him?